going to begin this afternoon session with a brief introduction. So welcome everyone to the Canadian Institute of Forestry's electronic lecture series entitled Looking Back, Looking Forward, the Ongoing History of Canada's Forests. My name is Matt Mead and I'll be moderating today's session. So today is June 13th, 2012, and we're very pleased to have Dr. Martin Hebert with us today, who will be discussing multiple histories, multiple perspectives, the challenges and opportunities of forest history in Quebec. So Dr. Hebert is a professor of anthropology at Laval University. He has participated in several research projects dealing with the involvement of First Nations in land and natural resource management in Mexico and Canada. In 2007, he edited a special issue of the journal Recherches Amérindiennes au Québec titled First Nations and Forests. His work deals mainly with conflict and conflict resolutions, participation processes, as well as multi-actor processes. He has been the vice president of the Quebec Forest History Society since 2010 and holds a monthly column in the publication Le Monde Forestier, presenting an anthropological view on forest issues. So with that introduction, I'll hand it over to you, Martin, to get us started this afternoon.
Well, thank you very much. And first, I'd like to thank Matt for the invitation. It's really an honor to be with you today and have the opportunity to, at once, at the same time, introduce a little bit the work of the Société d'Histoire Forestière du Québec, which I will call the SHFQ, Quebec Forest History Society, and to talk a little bit more about some more specific aspects like those Matt mentioned in my title, which are the multiple histories and multiple challenges that come with taking into account various histories and various views of the forest within the context of the Forest History Society. So that's why I'm going to present some of the work that the SHFQ is doing. And through this presentation, I will use these projects to illustrate how, in a very practical way, it seems, or at least we think it is possible to incorporate multiple views within a field where typically we get more representation of, for example, scientific forestry or the industry and ecology. So really our project, and if you look at the slides, we are at the first slide here, our projects led us to establish contacts and partnerships with a variety of actors. This is a very conscious effort that we go through within the SHFQ. We don't want to be associated with one particular group of actors, either government or industry or First Nations or universities, but we really want to project the image of a society where actually all these actors can actually come together and share their particular view of history and their particular perspective on it. So that's why you see we have the Ministry of Natural Resources of Quebec, which is a very important partner for us. The Sierra, that's a center for the study of First Nations based at the Université Laval. So we have we benefit from the contacts that the Sierra has built over 40 years with First Nations in order to build projects, and I will be talking shortly about one of these projects. We have the SUPFER, which is a very important partner also from the very beginning, which is the Society for the Protection of Forest Against Fire, of Quebec, and many other partners. And these partners are very important because these are the ones that help us really to stretch a small budget, but really help us to accomplish quite a few things. So if we move to slide 2, I've presented here the mission of the Quebec Forest History Society because we thought this mission quite a bit. We thought about it for actively for at least a year and a half before coming up with this particular formulation in 2011. So that was perhaps a year ago. And I'd really like us to take a look at this mission because it sort of crystallizes a little bit the project that we have through all our various activities, and the sort of perspective that we want to bring to forest history in the province of Quebec, at least. So, well, the first sentence is pretty basic. So, basically, we're a nonprofit organization whose mission is to create and disseminate cultural and scientific content, promoting a better understanding of the forest history of the province of Quebec. So here we always want to keep this sort of balance between having some general public project. We have, for example, a project of videos in Quebec City where students from high school up to university can make sort of short videos documenting one aspect of the forest, the urban forest in Quebec City, and their history. And it's sort of a contest where you have judges and the public can vote. So it's pretty general public, but at the same time we keep a pretty active production in terms of reports, scientific research, and so we really want to keep contacts within a broad variety of sectors of the forestry world. The second sentence of the mission, I think, is the one we thought the most about, and also the one perhaps that sort of, well, I would say moves a little bit away from what a typical forest history society might be, although it's there everywhere. But here we really put this aspect explicitly within our mission, which is to further the transfer of knowledge between different actors and promote dialogue between a diversity of forest stakeholders in the spirit of cooperation and appreciation of the richness of the historical experiences tied to the forest of Quebec. The reason we put that there is that we came to the conclusion after, as Matt said in the introduction, I work quite a bit on multi-actor processes and context of conflicts and negotiation and things like that. And one of the conclusions that we come up, which is pretty basic but still pretty important, is that most of the contexts where we have really a diversity of actors that come together and exchange their views are contexts where decisions have to be made. There has to be an immediate output. There has to be a management plan that's signed and people come up with. There has to be a decision. And these contexts always sort of bring forth the expression of interest. Everybody sort of is pulling the rug a little bit on their side. And so we really wanted to provide sort of, I would say perhaps a little bit of a neutral space, maybe. That might be a little bit utopian, but still that's the concept, where people can actually come together, talk, and not have to come up with a result necessarily, but just, as we say here, promote sort of the appreciation of the point of view of other actors and other stakeholders on the forest. So basically just to promote this idea that there are a great many ways to see the forest, there are a great many ways to experience it, and every one of these ways has its own social importance, whether you're using the forest for economic benefits and providing jobs, or you're using the forest to go camping and sort of your personal sort of betterment or whatnot, or you're a First Nation and you use the forest for very specific cultural purposes. So the idea is to not promote one view of the forest over the others, but just simply create a space where everybody can talk about that and talk about it in an historical perspective, the history of recreational uses of the forest, the history of the industry, the history of scientific forestry, and so on and so forth. If you move to the slide number 3, you will see, I think, what is probably the hub of our Forest History Society. where all these documents and these projects come together in a very sort of condensed form, which is the website of the society. So this is a very important part of our work. We've put a lot of resources, well, proportionally to our general budget, I would say, we've put a lot of resources in the website over the last year, certainly, and we plan to put more in the coming years, because it really fits the kind of outlook that we want to bring to forest history. That is, to give the opportunity here to a diversity of people to come in contact with views of the forest with which they're not really familiar. So if you look at this screenshot from our website, you will see on the right where it says Ancillary, you have this little sort of box there. That's actually the entry point for the video contest I was talking about. So that's if somebody, for example, a student wants to post his video online, he has to go to the website and click on that icon, and then he enters the zone for the contest. But on the other hand, if you look at the left side of the screen, you have sort of pioneers of scientific forestry in Quebec. So it doesn't mean that somebody who comes in for the contest will necessarily look at the other sections, but at least it's there, and it sort of provides a constant reminder that, you know, there is more to forest history and to forest culture than just your specific interests. It's the same way around for example, somebody who comes in for very specific archival research on the website and sees that we have ongoing activities with school children or with other groups. So it's a very conscious effort to mix things up a little bit and get people to explore other aspects of forest history. The website itself has a diversity of product and content. We do have an interesting archival section where you have pictures and documents from the Society for the Protection Against Fire. You have archives from various pioneers of the field in the field of scientific forestry. A number of, for example, faculty from Université Laval who have taken who have retired, have sort of transferred us a number of their documents and pictures, and we've just posted them online. They're in the section for members, but you can access part of the material for free. And of course, every document that's produced from the Forest History Society is there, from very technical reports right down to general outline of the role of women in scientific forestry in 5 pages produced for the general public. So we have a diversity here of interest and of perspectives on forest history. Okay, if you move to slide number 4, you will see here 2 examples of reports that the Forest History Society of Quebec has produced in collaboration with other partners. But on both these reports, we were sort of the main author, if one could say. The reason I've put these 2 reports there is not to get into the specific content of each, but really it's there to show how we try as much as possible to promote the importance of history and forest history within the context of present-day debates. So yes, we do do a number of products and publications on dealing with very classical, I would say, aspects of forestry. We have, for example, a section of the website that's coming in this summer about traditional craft tied to the forest. But here we have some very contemporary issues in which we try to sort of bring the historical perspective to show that it's important to take into account historical documents and data and into very present management decisions. So the one on the left, in French it's aires protégées, protected areas, is actually a report that was made to document the possibility of creating a number of protected areas in the region of central Quebec, I would say, but protected areas of of a certain category, category 6, if I'm correct, from the IUCN classification there, which are protected areas where traditional resource management practices are allowed. So, for example, very low intensity forestry with horses and other aspects, very low intensity sort of cutting of trees for various building ships, for example, small crafts and other aspects of traditional use are documented here. So it relates to a very present-day preoccupation by the government of Quebec to increase the proportion of protected areas in certain parts of the province, but also it brings forth the idea that knowing history and knowing past resource management strategies can actually contribute to a better understanding of what these protected areas could be. For example, one of the major topic within that report is the definition of what constitutes a traditional resource management strategy. What is traditional? How far back do you have to go? What kind of link does a traditional activity have with the community? Is there a tie between the two and things like that? So we go through a number of definitions of what traditional can be and so forth. The other report on the right is actually a report of sort of an inventory of the historical knowledge we have about what is called pre-industrial forests by the government of Quebec. And this data is used in ecosystemic management. So this kind of management, which the government of Quebec is trying to really put forth in its new forestry regime that it's setting up for 2013, relies quite a bit on this kind of historical data, which serves as sort of a goal-setting sort of set of data, saying, well, while managing the forest, we have to move more and more towards what the forest composition and nature was prior to the intensification of forestry. So here, although it's a report dealing with very contemporary issues, it raises a lot of very traditional aspects of forest history, dealing with sources, archives, the reliability of these documents. How do you rebuild, for example, a picture of what the pre-industrial forest would be, and what is the margin of error and things like that. So paleoecology enters into that also. So in other words, a pretty history intense approach, but to a very contemporary subject. Okay, so if we move to slide number five, you have here another project, which is probably the first one, or first important one that the Quebec Forest History Society has carried through. It's actually a book dealing with the history of the forestry department of the Université Laval. In 2010, this department celebrated its 100th anniversary. So the Forest History Society went and to see the university and said, we could actually collaborate with you and create this book, which really tells the story of your department and over since the beginning right up to today. The book was a major undertaking for a small forest history society, certainly. It took a lot of our resources, but we had a great author, Cyril Gélina, who really is a living encyclopedia of Quebec Forest History Society, for Quebec Forest History. And of course, Cyril was able to write the book in a way that it's not just the history of of scientific forestry, but also it ties the history of the discipline, if you like, with sort of the cultural context of each period that the department has gone through. So again, it was this idea of bridging in a certain way scientific forestry and, for example, policy, economic context, cultural context. The section on the 1960s, for example, and early 70s deals a lot with the arrival of women within the field of forestry in Quebec. What were the social dynamics of that? Where did the women come from? Basically, often from biology programs, for example, and things like that. So really, it's a history of the department, but also it aims to be somewhat of a social history also of scientific forestry in Quebec. Okay, if we move to slide number 6. Slide number 6 is actually a project that we did for the general public. It's a poster that lies now on the top of a mountain somewhere along the coast of the St. Maurice River. Basically, we were contacted by a land manager who wanted to sort of build up tourism in his region, and he came across the base of an old fire tower. The fire tower itself had been destroyed and taken away and sold for scrap metal, but the only thing he saw on top of this little hill was 4 posts and sort of a cement base, and he contacted us and said, do you think you can actually help me to document what was there before? And we actually did the research, and I actually found archives documenting this exact tower in the regional archives, documenting how it cost, how much it weighed, in what year it was built, what type of model, and actually the landowner was able to go and purchase another tower which is identical and rebuild it right on the spot where his tower used to stand, and now the poster lies next to it. Then it's a great opportunity for campers and fishermen who go through that region to actually stop and learn a little bit about fire protection measures in the early 20th century in that region. So it was really a fun project, to the extent that it came as a request from the community. It wasn't in our plans to do something like that, but really it helped us to bridge sort of the gap between sort of our society and a public of fishermen, hunters, and who really are not that involved in forest history in Quebec traditionally. Okay, if we move to slide number 7, you get here, you have an example of our magazine, which is published twice a year. As I said here, it's published between 1,000 and 1,500 copies. Of that, we have about 300 that go to our members and partners, and the rest is sold. And people really are attracted to this product. It costs quite a bit for us. It's not a cheap magazine to produce. It's full color. It's in paper form, which in itself is expensive by definition. But it really helps us to reach a public that would not, for example, go simply online and download this type of magazine, and it certainly reach another public than a scientific publication or scientific journal would reach. People like the illustrations, they like the short articles. I know a lot of private lot owners that keep this magazine on the coffee table, and it talks about them. It talks about their world and sort of something that they're familiar with, but on the other hand, showing aspects that are not that known about it. So, and you can see here I've put two little arrows showing that in every issue we try to combine different points of view along the lines of our mission that I've stated at the beginning of this talk. So, for example, here you have an issue, 2010 issue on sugar maple, and on the cover you have, as always, one sort of article that's announced about a pioneer of scientific forestry. So an interview with Miroslav Krantner, who was actually on the faculty at Laval University for many, many years. So recounting his career and sort of his research interests and things like that, but in the form of an interview, so it doesn't get too technical for the public. And also we have sort of this one was an easy one. It's sugar maple is you do have a lot of material about that, but it allowed us to enter into what we call the popular imagination. We try to keep, although we have a broader view of the diversity of point of view, we try to work with at least three main pillars, I would say, of this diversity, which are first scientific forestry, the other one popular imagination and representations, and the third one First Nations. Of course, every one of these pillars has a lot of diversity within itself, but still that's sort of the rule of thumb that we try to bring to our productions, where we try to keep some sort of balance between scientific, industrial, governmental productions, popular in all its variations, and First Nations. And speaking of First Nations, if you move to slide number 8, you see here sort of the front page of our latest publication, of our latest magazine, which was in itself quite a challenge to bring to completion, because after 5 years of trying to represent the diversity of points of view on forest and forest history, we decided that yes, it was time to really try to reach out to First Nations and build a project that would really be a partnership, that would really try to represent the point of view of at least one First Nation, and sort of build our capacity as a forest history society to make this kind of connection and partnership. It was a long process. That's why you see that it's a double issue, 2010, 2012. It actually counts for 2 of our publications, because it took us at least, I would say a year to really from start to finish. It required quite a bit of dialogue, of negotiation, of trying to figure out what would be in there. But I think that the content itself and the result is quite interesting. Certainly not along the lines of what we had expected at first, but somehow it became more interesting with time. As Matt said, recently I edited a volume on First Nations and forests, which was more along the lines of which was within a scientific journal, so it had a certain tone to it. And I can certainly say that this particular issue of our magazine, which also deals with one First Nation and the forest, is completely different from the first scientific production that I've made on this topic. So Well, to start with, we decided to work with one First Nation. It's almost impossible to start a very, I would say, satisfying relationship with the whole of First Nations at once. They have different views of the forest. They have different interests. They have different stories that they want to tell. Sometimes these stories enter into contradiction one with another. So what we decided to do is over a period of many years to come, we will try to go through all 10 First Nations and Inuit of Quebec and have maybe once every 2 years one issue that really tries to represent a partnership with one First Nation. So this one was with the Hurons, who have a reserve just north of Quebec City. I previously had a number of research projects with them, but we decided to start this project from scratch. Basically, we sat down at a table, tried to see what were the expectations of everybody, what they would like to see within a magazine like that, what we thought our members would be interested in, and thus began the negotiation and the building of this issue. What I'll do for the next 10 minutes or so it's basically walk through this issue, because it really raises a lot of elements that are central to this challenge of building a forest history that is diversified and deals with each actors and stakeholder in a respectful manner. So if you move to slide number 9, you would see probably what I consider one of the great successes of this issue, that is to get at the same time a letter of support published within the issue itself. This is page 1 and page 2, basically. One is from the chief of the Huron Nation, and the other one is from the Minister of Natural Resources. And they both state their involvement and support for this project. So I could probably give another talk for an hour about the process of simply coming up with these two texts and having that published there. But that I think illustrates the success that we feel, at least, having gone through this process. So not everybody was happy with everything, but at least we got to a point where people sort of rallied with the project and really gave their support from a variety of perspectives. We had, for example, a very interesting relationship not only with the band council of the Hurons, but also with the business community of Wendake, their community. So that shows that it's not only a political tie. We also tried to work really our relationship with the community as a whole, I would say. If you move to slide 10, that's actually one of the introduction that I wrote within this volume. I will not get into the details of that, but really the reason why I've put that there is because one thing that became clear as the project was evolving was that there really was a need to state clearly what was the purpose of writing about First Nations within the context of forest history. It might seem obvious for people who are in this environment, but for the First Nation itself, which we worked, basically for them, forest history was just the history of the industry, the history of legislation and policies, which historically have excluded them in many ways. It was the history of scientific forestry, and there was this sort of stereotype that we had to break from the onset, and my text basically deals with that. saying what place can First Nations have within forest history, and what can forest history bring to First Nations also. So sort of trying to reflect on that very rapidly, I would say that the text revolves around three basic contributions that can be made on either side. So First Nations can contribute to our historical data, the validation. I was talking earlier about pre-industrial forest studies that are made in Quebec. Well, it's surprising to see that now today these studies take very little account of traditional environmental knowledge of First Nations. So they take very little account of what were the important tree species and animal species within the forest that were of importance for First Nations. So this is one element where we can actually have a win-win situation where First Nations have more input within sort of the production of the basic data that will orient ecosystemic research, ecosystemic management, and also where ecosystemic management reflects more the preoccupation and traditional activities of First Nations within the forest. Another obvious but important aspect of bringing history into the debate of First Nations and forests is really providing a very elaborate and clear background about sort of how did we get here, how did sort of the relationship between the state, the industry, and First Nations evolved over time. There is quite a bit of that type of research and reflection that's made that sort of explains sort of how we entered a colonial system and how native lands were taken away from them, and that's very important also and helps to bring consciousness to a number of forest actors who are not necessarily fluent with this kind of literature and historical knowledge, but also when we go into the historical data, we find that actually there are also some gray areas where there actually were productive partnerships, for example, between industry and First Nations in the 19th century, where we find also cases where, in some cases, forest companies really did manage their land in a way that was, well, in the early 20th century, in a way that was a little bit similar to how First Nations were at least gaining knowledge about their land. So having a very active presence within the forest, for example, walking it. The forest industry in Quebec had what they called the walkers. People paid basically to walk the forest and do inventories. Well, these people are, I think, very important historical figures within the history of industrial forestry in Quebec, because they did gain a lot of knowledge from First Nations. They had contact with them on a regular basis and really learned from them and contributed to build bridges that are now often, I would say, forgotten. So aspects like that really needed to be put on the table right up front to say, there is possibility for a dialogue between First Nations and forest history. Okay, if we move to slide number 11, there I will go a little bit more quickly on these various articles, although they are all important, but I'd like to point out the diversity of contributions that we had, and also what's the role of each text within the general organization of this project. So the first one we have here by Jean-François Richard is actually a long text documenting the traditional occupation of the Hurons, traditional occupation of their territory. So this person actually is an anthropologist working for the Band Council. So he brought, I would say, the point of view from the Band Council, saying, this is how we see our occupation of the forest. And this might seem some pretty basic as an approach, say, to writing this kind of history, But what one has to realize is that it's one of the rare cases where actually the First Nation itself has the opportunity to talk about its occupation of the land without being in a courtroom or sitting in front of government negotiators or having to sort of protect its rights or negotiate something that's crucial for the nation. And now we have an opportunity to have some more, to do some groundwork, to do some really important sort of public education work where the point of view of the First Nation itself is expressed and communicated to a public which they don't reach that often. And actually, one of Jean-François, this particular author, told me that he said the one thing that convinced me to write in this magazine, in this special issue, is that when I learned that my article would be published next to a chainsaw ad, because he said, we don't get that many chances to reach foresters and people in the industry, and so that's an important opportunity for us. So you see here again, sort of very modestly, but still, these are small steps that are not usually taken within the context of Quebec forestry, or are not that easy to take. So here we have sort of this combination of different publics and different producers of text, and trying to mix things up a little bit. If you move to slide number 12, you have here, if you look on the right, you have two articles, the title section of two articles that are interesting because we basically put side to side two interpretations of a tree. What was the identity of one particular tree that served to cure some illness that the Europeans had when they came. So I forget the name in English, but it's a lack of vitamin C deficiency. And history has it that actually it was a gift from the Hurons or their ancestors to the French settlers that actually saved the colony. But nobody actually knows for sure what was that tree, from what tree did the remedy come from. So here we have two very different interpretations that come to different conclusions. One thinks it's a cedar, the other one thinks it's a white pine. And even though, on top of that, not only do they come with different conclusions, but they also use very, very different methodologies. And this was done on purpose within the magazine itself, the publication itself, because we have on the one side an historian who writes from sources, documentation, archives, and does a very detailed analysis of historical texts and things like that. And on the other side, we have a Huron medicine man who talks about how his father told him what was the identity of that tree, how his sisters and mothers were using it on a regular basis. And so we really tried to make this contrast, not to play the referee and say, well, one is right, the other is not, but really to say, there are different ways of thinking and knowing the forest. And of course you see another text by me on the right, which was a very small text of presentation, but really that said basically what I just said here, that is, that tried to provide some sort of link between the two texts and a way for the readers to interpret what they might construe as a contradiction, while saying, it's not only about species identification. There is a narrative to each of these texts, and you should appreciate them for what they are. So there is here a sort of a little discourse on traditional knowledge, scientific knowledge, and how they can actually mingle and enrich each other. Slide 13 is another very important text, I think the first lexicon of trees and forest-related vocabulary from the Huron language. As some of you might know, the Huron language was ceased to be in use for a large part of the 20th century. And now today only revitalization efforts are underway, and it's been now 2 years that actually classes in Huron have started again, and the kids are starting to learn their language. So there is a huge effort to sort of revitalize the language and sort of make it relevant to the world and of today, and sort of bring it more in use. And this is part of that effort from the community, saying, here is our way to talk about talking about the forest. This is our way of doing that. Okay, and then I have some few slides. If you move to 14, for example, you have just one page of what are about 5 or 6 pages similar to that within the volume. They're basically pictures with sort of a little explanation, who is on the picture and who took it and what's the painting and what so general information, and more specifically who is on it. And this was actually a specific request from the community itself. They wanted to see historical material relating to them. They don't just want to see text and analysis. They want to see parts of their history in a very explicit way, in a very lively way also. And actually, this is a part of the document that's quite appreciated and that circulates a lot between people who basically don't have that much of an interest in forest history in general, but really are interested in seeing, what their ancestors were doing on the land and how they were doing it. So this was a very successful aspect to it. Now, slide 15 is just one part of an interview that was done with the curator of the Museum of the Nation. So again, sort of bringing in the perspective and sort of what's the thinking within the community, and getting the museum involved, getting sort of institutions from the community to participate, and institutions which are not necessarily the political institutions. We have also the cultural ones that are important. And finally, the slide 16 is again a reproduction of one page of this issue, where we reproduce a text from the late 19th century. So we went into the archives, found a text that was very relevant. It gives a lot of details about how the Hurons were occupying the land, what they were doing there, how they were, and their activities and things like that. But it's a document that's not that accessible to many people. So now they have a facsimile of it, and they can actually keep it in their home. So this is, of course, just one illustration of how we're trying to bridge different histories of the forest within the context of Quebec. We work principally in that area, and how we try to bring different narratives to publics who are not that accustomed to hearing that. So, and I think even though, for example, this one was very, of course, as you saw, very oriented towards providing the point of view of First Nations, or of one First Nation on forestry and how its forests are managed today. And of course, some foresters and people from the government who read that saying, for them it was for one point of view, and some took issues with some aspects of that. But still, I think it's beneficial. It's a way of promoting a dialogue in a very convivial medium where people can actually write, and we will have other issues that deal with other perspectives. We have one on hunters and fishermen that's coming up in the fall. We have one on the forest as a place of spiritual inspiration. We have one on fighting forest fires, and so we're really trying to get a very detailed or diversified sample of how people live and relate to the forest in Quebec. So I think I've run over my time a little bit here, but that's pretty much the approach that our society has to promoting forest history, and also having a relevance to debates that are current in the forest sector of Quebec today. So I thank you very much, and I'll be very happy to hear your questions and comments. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Martin. Excellent presentation. So I'll now unmute all the lines. And just a reminder that if you are sharing a line in a room with others, please mute your own line now by pressing *6, unless, of course, you have a question or comment for Martin. So *6 both mutes and unmutes your individual lines. So to ask a question, please state your name and where you're calling from, and then address your question to Martin. So just 1 second here, we'll open up the lines.
The conference is no longer in lecture mode.
Okay, so the lines are open. If there are any questions or comments for Martin, please go ahead.
Hello, I'm Eric Alvarez from Quebec, and I would have my question is about Martin. You talk about the importance to have a different point of view, and but do some stakeholders are upset that you don't talk enough about them, or that they don't have the opportunity to present their side of the story?
Yes, well, thank you, Eric. Yes, well, actually, of course, you can't provide everybody's point of view all the time. And, for example, here we did this special issue on one First Nation, the Hurons, and took us a year to bring that through, as I said. And of course, their neighbors, the Inus, who also, let's say, have claims on similar parts of the same territories. The Inus, the first thing that we heard when the magazine came out is the Innu saying, "Oh, that's it. The Forest Historical Society of Quebec is taking sides with the Hurons now." No, that's not how we work. But it's yes, momentarily, I would say, for people have that impression. But we do try to sort of mix things up and say, over a period of time, we will get through as much diversity as possible. Of course, everybody wants to have their point of view represented as much as possible, so sometimes people think that they're left a little bit on the side, but yeah, we do try. And of course, it's easier in a certain way to work with certain groups than others, to the extent that some groups, for historical reasons, have a lot more resources to put into this kind of production, and other groups that are traditionally excluded from benefits from the forest, for example, have very little resources to put into projects like that. So there is an imbalance there that we have to really take into account and try to compensate by injecting resources, for example, to represent some groups. And well, so yes, we need different strategies, but of course, it's never perfect.
Thank you.
This is Peter Murphy from Alberta. I really was overwhelmed by the scope of your activities there. I haven't a specific question, but I just wonder how the dickens you're able to do so much in such a variety. Is this all done through volunteer effort?
Yeah. Well, that's why I spent quite a bit of time at the beginning of the presentation on our partners, because this is the key. The network and the partners, they really help us to stretch our resources further than logic would say that they would go most of the time. We have partnerships with, for example, people in the computer business to help us to build the website. our website cost us, well, I wouldn't say next to nothing, but it was really, we got a good deal there. And producing the magazine itself, we do have some interesting contacts with people who are working in the page layout. And so, yeah, and what we do, starting from volunteer work, actually is that we try to recruit volunteers that have very, very different backgrounds. We try not to focus, for example, on academics or people from the industry or people from government or people who are private consultants. We really try to build teams of volunteers that have completely different backgrounds and try to get them to each activate their own networks.
How do you reach them? This could go on too long, but I'm really impressed, though, with what you're doing.
Well, I have to say that we have a very good general director for the society, Patrick Blanchet, who is doing exceptional work in building these networks. His work on a day-to-day basis, he basically makes phone calls, talks with people, and tries to bring people together who would never have met each other, and really try to establish this network. And after that, the projects themselves just sort of build around these personal relationships. So yeah, but it is a lot of work keeping the networks together.
Is your general director a full-time staff person then?
Yes, he is. So he's basically the staff for the society. So we put resources in for hiring him, and other people around him try to fund their own income with projects that they go and build. So, for example, having partnerships with the university allows us to write grant proposals through the National Social Science Research Council, for example. So we get these grants from the university, and then hire people from the Forest History Society to work on these projects. So there's really a level of synergy that we try to build there.
Yes. Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Are there other questions for Martin?
Martin, just to go back, I wonder if the scope of your interest reflects the philosophy of people in forestry in Quebec, or is it something that you have had to cultivate as you have developed your society?
Mm-hmm. I would say that the society tries to promote that culture rather than reflects that within the forestry sector. But there is an openness, more and more. I was really, well, for example, last year there was this manager working in the Ministry of Natural Resources and in operations, so in a very technical department where people deal with road building and whatever sort of technical aspects of forestry. But this manager realized that on his staff, he had, I think, 11 people working under him. And of the 11 people, 10 of them were women. So that person could just have let that slide as an interesting fact, but actually he contacted the Forest History Society of Quebec and said, I'd like to do something for my staff and recognize that we have all these women on our staff and sort of create a little event, half a day, where we would actually get somebody who comes in and explains a little bit of the historical background, how women came into forestry in Quebec, at what period, and then and it was a very successful event, very simple. As I said, it led to the production of a small document, 8 pages, I think, but it really helped sort of the internal workings of that unit, that sort of promoted cohesion for them, and allowed us to sort of promote history. So if that manager hadn't taken the phone and called us, that wouldn't have happened. So that's a good sign coming from.
It is a good sign.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again.
Well, thank you for your question.
Anybody else? A question or a comment? Well, hearing none, I guess we'll call it a day there. So I want to thank everyone for participating today, especially to our presenter, Dr. Martin Hebert, for taking the time to join us and share his knowledge and experience with us today. And just a reminder, this is the 5th e-lecture in this series in collaboration with our Forest History Societies. Our next e-lecture is next week on Wednesday, June 20th at the same time, and it will feature Mark McLaughlin, who will be presenting the New Brunswick Forest Authority, 1973 to 1980, an experiment in government-managed forest, as well as William Parenteau, whose talk is entitled Progressive Forest Legislation in New Brunswick, 1906 to 1918. So be sure to tune into those two next week. Once again, thanks very much, everyone. I hope that you all have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Martin. Great job.
Thank you, Matt.
Yes,
Yeah.
Bye, guys.
Bye.